Welcome back to another episode of Clothing Brief. Just as usual with our clothing briefs, we've got a few stories queued up of the latest and greatest stories happening in the last week. So thank you for joining us for this live conversation. We're going to start with the very thing we don't like to talk about.
The big T
the
word.
Two T's, really.
The two T's, yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think this is very relevant. We've seen so much impact come from the double T conversation. And what's some of the update?
Well, Trump is taking a more conciliatory kind of stance with China on tariffs at current, at the current
the
time.
moment,
I
yes.
think, this has got a little bit of a backlash with some of his more hawkish members, but I think, there is a nuanced approach to international trade. And I think Trump's realizing this. The world is connected. It's hard to disconnect when you don't have an infrastructure to support many of the things that China does. China has needs, and Xi's under pressure even in China. And I think this interconnected world is coming to bear, and I think Trump is realizing that. I think that as much as he wants to do this kind of long-term balanced deal, as we've talked about in previous episodes, this has got to be more of a conversation about short-term gains. He's opened up NVIDIA's microchips back into China, which I think eases some of the tensions in China, while it probably increases some of the tensions with some of his, his individuals that, again, are trying to be a little more protectionist. But I would tell you that bodes well for what I consider evolution, not revolution. You've got to be able to consider segments of our business. You have to understand what to protect, what to grow, and what to,
what needs more infrastructure.
Yeah, what needs more infrastructure, but also where certain things are never going to be rebuilt in the U.S. Apparel being in our business, less than 1% of that's being built in the U.S.
And the administration has already said they have no interest in bringing
so
that
I
back.
think that bodes well. Hopefully that softened tone is gonna balance some of the whipsaws that we're seeing in tariffs. I still believe we might have a few. The negotiation internationally is there. I think Trump's really pushing to have China buy more American in that deal. That is the goal. But you can't alienate other countries because purchasing American is also an emotional decision as opposed to just a financial one. So I think there has to be some diplomacy, there has to be some balance, and it looks like some of that's beginning to occur.
Okay. Another story about governments leading different decisions in our industry. We've had a couple conversations previously about France and the EU and different initiatives that are happening to promote more sustainkind carbon transparency,
neutrality, digital passport,
and a kind of a crackdown on fast fashion. France, we talked about recently, really taking measures against fast fashion, but there's a new one on the table targeting actual influencers.
Well, in response to fast fashion like Shein and Temu.
I liked that you were trying to combine that into one.
Kind of doing that Hollywood thing, which probably they're two arms of the same giant. But I would tell you that Temu and Shein are the ones that are really heavily targeted in this fast fashion kind of detail. France and EU in general are having this kind of aggressive stance and then pull back an aggressive stance. The digital passport, the Echo score is now moved from, I think, 2025 to now 2030, but they're looking at large scale offenders. And certainly when we were at the World Retail Forum a few years ago and Shein was on stage, I felt like, wow, this is going to be an interesting conversation. Well, I guess France has decided that conversation is not, the individual from Shein was talking about how they were supporting sustainability and all these things, and that was not bought from the EU and specifically France. They're actually now putting heavy fines and penalties on influencers that are driving fast fashion like Shein and Temu in the country. They're talking about offenders for influencers face fines up to 300,000 euros and 2 years imprisonment. Can you imagine what he in for?
Gosh,
He has
yes.
influenced fast fashion. And they're also putting penalties for the companies effective from 2025. It's banning advertising for all ultra fast fashion companies in the country. The penalty for each violation is about 100,000 euros.
Which I think that's interesting that that number is less than the individual influencer.
Well, that tells you the individual influencers still command a large amount of respect. That business has increased about $250 billion a year. So they know where, this whole thing is coming from. And I think they're doing their best to stem some of that.
Yes. And so what they're targeting with the influencers are videos, affiliate links, influencer codes, of course, paid and unpaid promotion, on those influencer campaigns. I think it's interesting what they're looking at doing with those fines. Those fines are going to support greener initiatives.
Which makes sense because they're really, some of the challenges we talked about in the previous episodes is that a lot of Europe is made up of small brands that this is going to be an expensive initiative over now the next 5 years, now that they pushed it out, for this digital passport, for improving recycling, improving sustainability efforts. This is something that the offset could help move that along the path. As we've talked, nothing happens overnight. I think that's what EU is dealing with, but at least they're having conversations and moving that down the path, as opposed to our current administration right now, which I think we need to be doing more.
So keeping the French in our headlines this week, we've had a lot of conversations that the traditional retail model is broken, and big chains they're suffering, and there's been an appetite for an overhaul in this space. It's been in the news that Printemps is making some headways, really changing the whole experience, and there's hope that once again the retail model could be revitalized.
Well, it is evolution, right? Lifestyle. It's really talking about lifestyle. In Manhattan, they're creating this whole kind of apartment store, not department store, but it's kind of apartment store. It blends art, dining, wellness, along with
champagne,
apparel and champagne, and as you walk into, and we were there, and it was amazing. Lines outside the door, wonderful, comfortable atmosphere. It didn't seem like high pressure selling. It was sort of like you walked through and got this wonderful experience, and then you found a piece you liked and you walked out the door. It was well curated, I think. It was a good move in the right place. And I think, experience first design is finding its way into all aspects of retail. People are exploring the Japanese concept, also this whole amazing service level and experiential retail that the Japanese have. They're looking into Europe to do that. And we're seeing that evidence even with some of the conversations we're having about creating these kind of community economic zones, bringing art and music and fashion and food together. And I do like that trend. I think that's definitely going in the right
exciting.
direction.
It's more than just going out and shopping. It's creating a full, memorable moment. Yeah. So staying in New York now, there's been some controversy in New York. There's some rezoning happening, and that's going to put many businesses at risk in the garment district.
New York has, for a long time, fashion houses and brands and designers, they've moved from uptown to midtown to Chinatown, things get more expensive. It's hard to sustain that. And now with rezoning, I think it's going to potentially put over 5,000 jobs or people out of jobs. It's going to move about 100 businesses. It's going to really kind of mess about with, the fashion ecosystem that is New York. I think that to to our perspective, it bodes well for other cities, much like the Midwest, to really capture more of that fashion business. There was a whole conversation from Bloomberg that we talked about in
Right.
past episodes, the flight to Midwest, where things are more affordable. There's ecosystem support for that. And so, this to me is good news for other cities that are looking to garner fashion and designer houses.
Yeah, we've had a lot of conversations with businesses based in New York, and they're constantly having to move to the next area that's a little less expensive, and they're constantly struggling with the cost of their space
Yeah.
versus what the garment industry isn't one that's operates on high margins, so
Right.
it's a very difficult formula.
Yeah.
So where you're right, where there's challenge, there's opportunity, and maybe this is just a good opportunity for the fashion industry to spread its wings a little.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, those are all our headlines this week. Just a few, not too many, not a big heavy week for us, but don't worry, we'll keep our tabs on what's happening, and we'll touch base next week. We'll keep you up to date. Don't forget to subscribe to stay apprised of upcoming episodes. We do have our longer format podcast, lots of great conversations there of many years of episodes. So depending on your area of interest, you can find it there. We'll see you right here next week.